My name is Evelyn, and I'm 45 years old. I live in a quiet little town in Oregon, surrounded by pine trees and fog that rolls in from the river every morning. My days are simple. I own a small floral shop that keeps me busy and helps pay the bills. I lost my husband, Michael, 5 years ago in a car accident, and ever since then, Christmas had always been bittersweet. I tried to keep it cheerful, but truthfully, the holidays only reminded me of what I'd lost. This particular Christmas, I wanted nothing more than to have a calm evening with my daughter, Clara, and her husband, Joel. They'd been married for 2 years, and while Clara was my entire world, I had my doubts about Joel. There was something about him too slick, too charming, the kind of man who smiled while hiding something behind his teeth. But I stayed polite for Clara's sake. I told myself that she was an adult and that she deserved to make her own choices, even if those choices made me uneasy. I had decorated the house like I always did, twinkling lights along the window, a pine-scented candle burning on the mantel, and a roast chicken baking in the oven. When they arrived, I noticed right away that Clara looked tired. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and Joel was unusually chipper, almost forced. "Merry Christmas, Mom," Clara said as she hugged me tightly. I felt her grip linger, as though she was holding on for something more than affection. Joel followed behind, carrying a few wrapped presents and a shiny red envelope tucked under his arm. We exchanged gifts like families do, small things, mostly thoughtful gestures. Clara gave me a framed photo of the three of us at my shop's grand reopening, and I gave her a set of earrings she'd admired months ago. Everything seemed fine, normal even. I remember thinking how maybe this year would be different. Maybe we'd finally have a quiet, peaceful Christmas again. Then came the red envelope. Clara smiled nervously as she handed it to me. "This one's from both of us," she said, glancing quickly at Joel. "It's a bit different," I laughed softly. "Well, you two have been full of surprises before. Should I open it now?" "Of course," Joel said with a grin that didn't quite feel real. "It's something that'll change your life." The way he said it sent a tiny shiver up my spine. Still, I opened it, expecting maybe a plane ticket, or some sort of heartfelt letter. What I saw instead made my stomach twist into knots. It wasn't a card, it wasn't even a letter. It was a legal document titled Debt Transfer Agreement. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe some prank or misprint. But as I read further, I realized what it said. I had apparently agreed to take on $60,000 of debt from Joel's business venture. And worse, my signature was at the bottom of the page. My hands began to tremble. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Joel leaned back in his chair, smug as ever. "It's a debt transfer," he said casually, as though discussing a grocery list. "You're listed as a guarantor now, Evelyn. Don't worry, it's just temporary." "Temporary?" I repeated. My voice cracked as I looked at Clara. "You did this? You both did this?" Clara's face turned red. "Joel said it was just paperwork to help us out until his next payment clears. I didn't think—" "You didn't think?" I snapped, unable to contain my disbelief. "You didn't think signing your mother's name onto a $60,000 debt was wrong?" Joel's expression hardened. "Look, you're better off financially than we are. It's just family helping family. We'll pay it off." I stared at him, my pulse hammering in my ears. The man was audacious, sitting in my living room, eating my food, and gifting me his debt as if it were a thoughtful present. "I never signed this," I said firmly. "This is forgery." He shrugged. "Well, your name's on it now, so whether you remember signing it or not doesn't matter much, does it?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. My chest felt tight, like the air itself had turned against me. Clara began to cry softly, but Joel didn't even flinch. He looked almost satisfied, as if he'd finally pulled off something he'd been planning for a long time. I stood up slowly and pointed toward the door. "Get out," I said. "Both of you." "Mom," Clara began, but I cut her off. "No, not another word. Leave my house." Joel muttered something under his breath, but he obeyed. As they left, the cold winter air swept in, snuffing out the warmth that had filled my home just an hour earlier. When the door closed, I sat at the table, staring at that cursed piece of paper. My signature, neat, precise, exactly like mine, but I knew I hadn't written it. I'd seen enough of Joel's arrogance to know what had happened. He must have forged it, probably using one of the many forms I'd signed over the years when Clara needed my help with wedding paperwork or apartment leases. The betrayal stung deeper than I could have imagined. Not just from Joel, but from Clara, my own daughter, who'd stood by and let it happen. I picked up the document, folded it carefully, and placed it on the counter beside the dying candle. The house was silent, save for the crackle of the fire and the faint hum of the refrigerator. In that silence, I made myself a promise. This wasn't going to end here. Not with me drowning in someone else's lies. When I opened it and saw the words, "Debt Transfer Agreement," my hands began to shake. My daughter had just gifted me her husband's debt over $60,000 worth. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at the forged document under the dim glow of the lamp. The handwriting, the formatting, it all looked legitimate. My name, Evelyn Hart, was written in my usual, cursive style, down to the small curve I always made on the I. My stomach churned at the thought of Joel practicing my signature until he perfected it. I tried to convince myself that there had to be a misunderstanding, that Clara wouldn't go along with something so cruel. But the look on her face earlier that evening, the guilt, the avoidance, told me everything I needed to know. She knew. Maybe not the full extent of it, but she knew enough to keep quiet. By morning, I decided to visit my bank. The winter wind outside bit through my coat as I walked to my car. I could barely feel my fingers on the steering wheel as I drove into town, my thoughts spinning faster than the snow flurries swirling around me. When I arrived at the bank, I asked to speak with Mr. Taylor, the branch manager I'd known for years. He'd helped me refinance my house after Michael died, and I trusted him. But when he pulled up my file and confirmed that the debt was indeed registered under my name, I felt a wave of nausea. "Evelyn," he said gently, "this signature here, it's identical to the one we have on record. It would be difficult to prove forgery unless you have clear evidence someone else signed it." "So that's it?" I asked, my voice shaking. "He forges my name and I'm just stuck with it?" "Not necessarily," he said, "but you'll need legal representation, a handwriting analysis, police involvement, the works. It's a long process." I thanked him, though the words felt hollow. As I walked back to my car, I saw Joel's smirk flash in my memory. That smug confidence he carried, like the world owed him something. He thought he'd won. When I got home, I called Clara. She didn't answer. I tried again, and again, until finally she picked up on the fourth attempt. "Mom, I don't want to fight," she said immediately, her voice defensive. "I'm not calling to fight," I replied. "I just want to understand. Why would you let Joel do this? Why would you let him use my name?" She hesitated. "He said it was just a temporary transfer, that it would help him pay off the business loan faster. I didn't think it would hurt you." "Didn't think it would hurt me?" My tone hardened. "You gave me your husband's $60,000 debt as a Christmas gift, Clara. That's not just thoughtless, it's cruel." She sniffled on the other end. "He said you had savings. He said you'd be okay." Those words pierced deeper than anything Joel could have done himself. My daughter, my only child, had rationalized my financial ruin because she thought I could handle it. I hung up before my anger turned into something uglier. For hours, I sat on the couch, staring out the window at the snow-covered street. My neighbors' houses glowed with festive lights, laughter echoing faintly from a few doors down. But in my home, the holiday spirit had died completely. Later that evening, my lawyer, Denise, returned my call. I explained everything, sent her photos of the documents, and waited as she reviewed them. After a few minutes, she sighed. "Evelyn, this is bad. Whoever did this knows what they're doing. The forgery's convincing, and unless you have witnesses or hard proof, it'll take months to unravel. But don't panic yet. There are ways to fight it." "I'm not panicking," I said, though my voice betrayed me. "I just can't believe my own daughter could be part of this." "Sometimes love makes people do stupid things," Denise said softly. "And manipulation makes them do worse." Her words lingered with me long after we hung up. I'd always known Joel had a manipulative streak, small lies here and there, exaggerated stories about his investments, late payments he brushed off with charm. But I'd underestimated him. I thought his arrogance was harmless. I was wrong. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Joel himself. I almost deleted it, but curiosity or perhaps rage got the better of me. Joel, hey Evelyn, hope we're cool. I know the papers were a surprise, but I promise it'll all work out. You're helping family here. We'll square up soon. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Helping family. The audacity of that phrase made me want to throw the phone across the room. Instead, I opened my notepad app and began writing everything down: dates, messages, details, anything that could help later. I wasn't going to let him win. Over the next few days, I started connecting dots. I noticed charges on my credit report I hadn't made. Letters from lenders arrived in my mailbox, all addressed to me but clearly linked to Joel's failed ventures. He'd been using my information for months, quietly building his empire of deceit behind my back. The betrayal wasn't just financial anymore, it was personal. He had violated my trust, my peace, my sense of safety. And the worst part? My daughter had stood beside him while he did it. I couldn't sleep that night either. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Joel's grin, Clara's tears, and that cursed red envelope. By dawn, I made a decision. If I couldn't rely on anyone else to prove what Joel had done, I would prove it myself. I would find the evidence. I would expose him. And I would make sure that when he fell, he'd never get back up again. I knew I couldn't let this go, not just for my finances, but for my dignity. The betrayal from my own daughter cut deeper than any financial loss ever could. The following morning, the world outside looked peaceful, white snow blanketing everything, the air crisp and still. But inside my house, there was nothing but storm. I brewed a cup of coffee I didn't drink and sat at the table, my eyes glued to the debt papers as if staring long enough might make them disappear. It didn't. By 9 a.m., I was back at the bank, demanding they pull every document connected to that loan. The clerk gave me sympathetic glances as she printed page after page Joel's fake business name, the dates, the guarantor signature, all leading back to me. When I saw my forged signature again, that same sinking feeling spread through my chest. It was too perfect, too practiced. I left the bank with a folder full of copies and drove straight to my lawyer, Denise. Her office smelled faintly of lemon polish and desperation, the scent of people who came looking for help too late. She flipped through the pages and frowned. "This is deliberate," she said after a while. "He's done this before, I can feel it. And your daughter's involvement, that complicates things." "Clara's not a criminal," I said quietly, almost to convince myself. "She's naive, blinded by him. But she's not malicious." Denise looked at me for a long moment before replying. "Love can make people accomplices without them realizing it." That truth hit me harder than I expected. I drove home in silence, the heater humming as snowflakes danced against the windshield. Clara had always been a sweet girl, eager to please, soft-hearted to a fault. I'd watched her grow from a timid child into a young woman desperate to make her marriage work, maybe too desperate. When I got home, I called her again. She picked up this time. "Mom," she said wearily, "I told you Joel's working on fixing it. You don't need to worry." "Fixing it?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "Clara," he forged my signature. "That's a felony. Do you even understand what that means?" There was a pause, and then her voice turned small, almost childlike. "He said it's just a misunderstanding, that you agreed verbally and forgot. He said you're overreacting." A bitter laugh escaped me. "A misunderstanding?" "He's a con artist, Clara. He's using you and now me to clean up his messes." She began crying softly on the other end. "Mom, please. I just want everything to be okay, again." "So do I said. "But pretending nothing happened won't make it okay." We hung up without resolution. I wanted to reach through the phone and shake sense into her, but I knew it wouldn't work. She was still under his thumb, clinging to the version of Joel she wanted to believe in. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Michael, my late husband. He'd always been good with people, quick to spot deceit. If he were still alive, he'd have seen Joel's type from a mile away. I sat by the fire, watching the flames twist and burn, and whispered, "What do I do, Michael?" But the fire only crackled in reply. The next morning, I decided I needed to see Joel's so-called business for myself. I drove to the address listed on the documents, a small unit in an industrial park on the edge of town. The sign outside read, Hartwell Investments, a name I immediately realized was a combination of my last name and his. The audacity made my stomach turn. Through the glass door, I saw dusty desks, a flickering lamp, and a single computer. No staff, no paperwork, no sign of real activity. It was a front, a facade. A man in his 40s walked out of the neighboring unit and eyed me curiously. "You looking for Joel?" he asked. "Do you know him?" I replied. The man nodded. "Yeah. He rented this place a few months back, said he was running some kind of investment firm, but he's barely here, always coming and going, taking phone calls in the parking lot. A few folks stopped by asking for him last month, said he owed them money." My suspicion solidified into certainty. Joel wasn't just careless, he was a professional liar. I thanked the man and left, my heart pounding as I drove home. I pulled up my laptop, typed Hartwell Investments Oregon, and found nothing. No registration, no business license. Just an empty name. Piece by piece, his web of deceit began to unravel in front of me. I printed everything I found, screenshots, fake listings, even a few angry reviews on obscure business forums. I filled an entire folder and labeled it, The Truth. When Denise called later that evening, I told her everything. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "Keep documenting everything, and start recording any conversations with Joel or Clara. Verbal proof can go a long way." I hesitated. "You really think this can end in my favor?" she sighed. "If we can prove forgery and fraud, yes. But it'll take time. And you'll need to be careful. Men like Joel don't go down quietly." After we hung up, I sat there in silence. The fireplace crackled softly beside me, but the warmth no longer reached me. I felt colder than the snow outside. Joel had betrayed me financially, yes, but what hurt more was knowing my daughter had helped him, even unintentionally. She'd trusted the wrong person, and now we were both paying the price. I looked at the folder labeled The Truth. It felt heavy in my hands, but it was more than paper, it was hope. Proof that I wasn't crazy, proof that I could still fight back. And I would. Because no one, no man, no fraud, not even my daughter's poor judgment was going to take away the life I'd built from scratch after losing everything once before. That's when I began digging into Joel's business, and what I found horrified me. Joel's so-called business was nothing more than a web of lies, debts, and deceit. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deep Joel's schemes went. What started as a few suspicious documents soon became a full-blown investigation. Every night after closing my flower shop, I'd sit at my dining table with my laptop open, coffee growing cold beside me, and dive into his digital trail. I wasn't just a mother anymore, I was a detective, tracing the steps of a man who had built his entire life on fraud. The first thing I discovered was that Hartwell Investments wasn't Joel's only company. There were at least 3 others registered under similar fake names, all with addresses that didn't exist. One claimed to be a real estate firm, another posed as a financial advisory group. None of them had employees, clients, or licenses. They existed only on paper shell companies used to shuffle money around. Each time I found another alias, my anger grew. He had built his empire using other people's trust, other people's money, and now, my name. But what truly sickened me was how familiar some of the investors sounded. A few were people from our small-town folks I'd known for years. The owner of the bakery down the street, an older couple who bought flowers from me every anniversary. They'd all fallen for his promises of guaranteed returns. Joel hadn't just stolen my security, he had poisoned the entire community. I printed everything: emails, addresses, fake testimonials, screenshots of deleted social media pages where he flaunted a lifestyle he couldn't afford. His arrogance was astounding. There were photos of him posing next to rented luxury cars, captioned, "Success is the result of smart risks." Every lie he told was wrapped in confidence and charm. I compiled it all neatly into binders, labeling them by category: forgery, financial fraud, witnesses, communications. My dining room looked like a crime board. I'd even started pinning photos to corkboards with strings connecting them, the way detectives do in movies. I wasn't going to let a man like Joel outsmart me. A week later, I brought everything to my lawyer, Denise. She looked impressed and horrified. "Evelyn," she said, flipping through the pages, "this is enough to open a full criminal investigation, but we need to move carefully. He'll know something's coming once authorities reach out." I nodded. "Good. Let him feel the walls closing in." Meanwhile, Clara had gone silent. She stopped answering my calls entirely. I assumed Joel had convinced her I was the enemy. That's what manipulators do, they isolate their victims. It hurt, but I knew pushing her now would only drive her further into his grip. Then, one night, while I was organizing more files, my phone buzzed. It was Joel. "Joel, you've been busy, haven't you?" My heart skipped a beat. How did he know? "Joel, I'd be careful, Evelyn. Snooping around in other people's business can get messy." I didn't reply, but I saved every message and forwarded them to Denise. My pulse was racing, but my resolve hardened. He thought he could scare me into silence. He still didn't realize that he'd picked the wrong woman to mess with. The next morning, I went to the local courthouse and requested public records on Joel's past. It took hours, but when the clerk handed me the file, I nearly dropped it. He had previous complaints, 3 of them, all dismissed for insufficient evidence, each involving financial disputes or contract forgery. He'd done this before, and walked away clean every time. That was when it hit me. Joel wasn't reckless. He was calculated. He'd studied the system and learned exactly how to exploit it. That evening, I sat in my shop after closing, staring out the window at the empty parking lot. The air smelled faintly of roses and rain, but I couldn't shake the bitterness in my chest. I thought of Clara, trapped in his lies, believing in a man who was using her as his shield. I imagined her crying alone, defending him because she didn't want to face the truth. I decided to give her one more chance. I sent her a text. "Me, Clara, please. I found proof Joel forged everything. I have witnesses. We need to talk." Hours passed with no response. Just when I was about to give up, she replied. "Clara, stop. Please don't make this worse. He's already stressed enough." "Stressed," I muttered under my breath. "He's a criminal, not a victim." I realized then that I couldn't save her until Joel's mask. It came off completely, and when it did, she would finally see the monster beneath. The next step was risky. I started recording our phone calls. Whenever Joel or Clara called me, I hit record. I captured everything: his threats disguised as politeness, his backhanded compliments, his false reassurances. Each clip added another layer to my evidence. Denise reviewed some of them and said, "This is good. If he slips up once and admits anything, it's over for him." It became my quiet mission to catch him in his own words. One night, he called again, sounding smug. "You really should stop wasting your time, Evelyn. No one's going to believe a grieving widow over a legitimate businessman." I forced a laugh. "You're right, Joel. You've always been good at pretending to be legitimate." He hesitated for half a second before hanging up. That half second told me he was nervous. I played the call back again and again, analyzing his tone, his choice of words. My instincts were right, he was unraveling. But what I didn't know then was that I wasn't the only one watching him. Others were, 2 people he'd burned before. And soon, our paths would cross. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and pride. Joel wanted to win at any cost. But he'd forgotten one thing mothers don't lose quietly. He didn't know that I was preparing to destroy everything he'd built on lies. Clara's world started to crumble as Joel's lies began catching up to him. The first real sign that things were changing came the afternoon she walked into my shop, looking like someone who'd been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, there were dark circles under her eyes, and she kept wringing her hands like she couldn't stop them from shaking. She hugged me for a long time, and when she finally pulled away, I could see she had been crying. "Mom," she said, voice thin, I'm so tired. We sat at the little table by the window where I write orders and sketch bouquet ideas. The bell over the door chimed now and then as customers came and went, but for those moments the shop felt like our own private room. Clara kept looking at the floor, speaking in fits and starts. When she finally looked up, I saw the hollow in her eyes that fear makes fear she'd been hiding under bravado for months. "It's getting worse," she admitted. "He's different lately. He snaps at me for nothing. He's been taking calls at all hours, he's paranoid about people, and sometimes he disappears." "You should tell me everything," I said, reaching across the table to hold her hand. She flinched but didn't pull away. She told me about creditors coming to the apartment, about men she didn't recognize making phone calls, about Joel locking the bedroom door at night and not letting her check his laptop. She talked about arguments that started over small things and exploded into shouting matches that left the apartment trembling. Each confession was like a chisel striking away at the image of the married life she'd wanted. "It's my fault," she said suddenly, head bowed. "I should have seen it. I should have left when I had the chance." "No," I snapped, without thinking, then softened. "Listen to me, this isn't on you. He manipulated you. He's good at hiding things. He's been manipulating everyone." She broke down, the kind of crying that is a release and a warning at once. "He says I'm disloyal if I talk to you. He says I choose him over my family. He says if I help you, I'm aiding the enemy." That line chilled me. Isolation is how predators keep their prey compliant. Joel had been slowly convincing Clara that anyone outside their little marriage was a threat, and for months she'd been cut off from the people who loved her most. The more I heard, the more I understood why she'd stayed. Fear and love are messy partners. A few days later, a neighbor called to tell me there had been shouting at Clara's apartment late at night. I drove over in my slippers and a coat and found the door ajar. Inside, furniture was overturned, cushions slashed, and a picture frame, one of Clara and me at her graduation, lay shattered on the floor. There were scuff marks on the wall and a smear of dark mud across the rug. It looked like something out of a movie, except the actors were real and trembling in the doorway. Clara stood by the sink, hands wrapped around a mug, staring at the mess with a face that had gone vacant. When she turned to me, I saw both terror and shame. I told him I'd help him. I told him I'd sign whatever he needed. I thought I could fix it. "Fix what?" I asked. "That he'd stop this, that he'd pay them back, that he'd stop lying." I wanted to promise her everything would be okay. I wanted to be the kind of mother who can fix broken marriages and mend ruined souls with a bowl of soup and a hug. But the truth was messier. I'd pulled together evidence, I'd traced his companies, I'd recorded his calls, but the law moves slowly, and criminals like Joel are practiced at buying time. Still, I couldn't let her stay under that roof another night. "Pack a bag," I told her firmly. "Come home with me. No lectures, no questions, just come." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. There was a relief in her acceptance, as if she'd been waiting for permission to escape. She came to my house that night with a small suitcase and a coat that smelled faintly of his cologne. I made her tea, sat with her by the fire, and listened while she tried to make sense of the collage of lies that had become her life. Over the following weeks, as she recovered physically and emotionally under my roof, tiny shifts began to show. She laughed at nothing at first, then at small things, then at silly jokes I made about the shop's clumsy cat. She started sleeping without flinching, awake at every creak. She volunteered at the women's support group I'd mentioned, the lawyer recommended. Each small act was a stitch sewing her back together. But the tension never left completely. Sometimes she'd jump at a noise, sometimes she'd pause before answering the phone. She avoided telling me details, like how Joel had threatened her family or the specifics of who else might be involved. She said she was afraid of retaliation. That fear was a heavy stone in my chest. I knew Joel was dangerous, and danger loves an opening. One afternoon, Clara sat me down and said, "Mom, I want to tell the police everything, but I'm scared." "You don't have to do it alone," I told her. "I'll be with you. Denise will be with you. We'll make sure you're safe." She wiped her eyes and nodded. "Okay." As we prepared to take the next step, contacting law enforcement with our findings, I had this sinking feeling that when we pulled this thread, it wouldn't unravel quietly. There would be consequences, and someone would not go down without a fight. When she left, I knew she was going to confront Joel, and that it wouldn't end peacefully. That night, I got a call that made my heart stop cold. It was close to midnight when the phone rang. The house was quiet, the kind of deep stillness that settles over everything after a long, heavy snow. I was half asleep on the couch when I saw Clara's best friend Megan flashing on the caller ID. My stomach dropped. Megan never called me that late. When I answered, her voice was shaking. "Evelyn, it's Clara, there's been an argument. The police are at her apartment, you need to come." I didn't even grab a coat. I threw on my boots and drove through the icy streets, the headlights cutting through falling snow. My mind ran wild. What if Joel had hurt her? What if he'd finally snapped? Every red light felt like punishment for not getting there faster. When I arrived, blue and red lights flickered across the building. 2 police cars were parked outside, and a small group of neighbors stood huddled near the entrance, whispering. My hands trembled as I approached an officer, my breath fogging in the freezing air. "I'm her mother," I said before he even asked. "Clara Hart, is she okay?" He nodded. "She's shaken up but safe, ma'am. She's inside giving a statement." Relief washed over me, followed quickly by dread. If she was giving a statement, then something serious had happened. Inside, I found Clara sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair tangled. When she saw me, she broke down, rushing into my arms like she had when she was a child who'd scraped her knee. I held her tightly, my hands running through her hair, whispering, "You're safe now, baby. You're safe." Through tears, she told me what had happened. Joel had come home drunk and furious. He'd found out someone was investigating his companies and accused her of being the leak. He'd shouted, thrown things, and accused her of betraying him. When she tried to defend herself, he'd shoved a chair across the room, breaking a lamp. She ran to the bathroom and locked herself in until he finally stormed out. The neighbors called the police when they heard the commotion. I wanted to hunt him down and make him feel even half the fear he had caused her. But instead, I focused on getting Clara out of there. She refused to stay another night, and I didn't argue. Together we packed her essentials, clothes, documents, and the small jewelry box her father had given her before he died. Back home, Clara sat by the fireplace in silence, staring into the flames. The orange light flickered across her face, making her look older, wiser, broken, and brave all at once. After a long time she finally spoke. "I think I knew who he really was all along," she whispered. "I just didn't want to believe it." I squeezed her hand. "He took advantage of that. But now, it's over. You're done letting him control your life." She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Mom, he made me sign things too. I didn't even read half of them. He said it was just paperwork for the business." My heart clenched. "You didn't know," I said firmly. "That's on him, not you. But you have to tell the police everything." She hesitated. "Will they believe me?" "They'll believe the truth," I said. "And I'll be right there with you when you tell it." The next day, we met with Denise, my lawyer, who immediately reached out to the detectives assigned to Joel's forgery case. Clara gave a full statement, recounting every threat, every suspicious document, every time Joel had manipulated her into silence. It wasn't easy, her voice shook, and at one point she had to step out of the room to compose herself, but she did it. By the time we left, Denise looked optimistic. "They'll build a solid case from this," she said. "We'll get him on multiple counts of fraud and coercion." That night, for the first time in months, Clara slept through the night. I stayed awake, listening to the wind outside, every creak of the house setting me on edge. My instincts told me Joel wasn't finished. Men like him didn't walk away quietly when control slipped through their fingers. 2 days later, my fears were confirmed. I came home from work to find my voicemail full. The first few messages were from customers, the usual floral orders. But the last one made my blood run cold. It was Joel's voice. "You think you can turn my wife against me, Evelyn? You think you can ruin my life? You have no idea who you're dealing with. You'll regret this. Both of you will. I saved the message immediately and forwarded it to Denise, then to the police. They advised me to install security cameras and change the locks, which I did that same evening. Clara was terrified, and truthfully, so was I, but I couldn't let her see it. I needed her to believe I was unshakable. The following week passed in tense quiet. No sign of Joel, no more calls. Clara started cooking again, humming while she stirred soup, as if trying to reclaim normalcy. I watched her and thought about how resilient she was, even after everything. But in the back of my mind, that voicemail echoed like a warning. Joel wasn't the type to disappear. He was the type to plot. To wait. To make you think you were safe before striking again. And as much as I wanted to believe this was the end of our nightmare, I knew better. What neither of us knew was that Joel wasn't done yet. Joel started sending me threatening messages and voicemails. It began a few days after the police took Clara's official statement. At first, the calls came from a blocked number, silent rings in the middle of the night, then hang-ups when I answered. I told myself it could be telemarketers, pranksters, anything but him. But by the third night, there was no denying it. When I picked up, I heard his voice. Calm. Measured. Chilling. "You think this is over, Evelyn?" he said. "You don't ruin a man's life and just walk away." I hung up immediately, my heart racing. The house felt suddenly too quiet, too empty. I checked every lock, every window, even peered through the blinds at the street outside. Nothing, just the faint hum of wind through the trees. When I told Clara, she turned pale. "He said he didn't know where you lived," she whispered. "Clara, that man knows everything," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's made a career out of finding weaknesses, but we're not weak anymore." The next day, I met with the detective in charge of Joel's case, a man named Detective Lawson. He listened carefully as I played the voicemail and showed him the call logs. He nodded grimly. "This qualifies as harassment. We'll flag his number, and if he contacts you again, we can issue a restraining order." I left the station feeling reassured, but only for a moment. Because when I got home, there was something waiting for me. A letter. No return address. Just my name. Scrawled across the envelope in Joel's handwriting. My stomach tightened as I opened it. "You can't erase me. You owe me. You both do. I'll collect when you least expect it." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a signature. The words were unmistakably his. Clara found me holding the letter, trembling. I tried to hide it, but she saw the fear written all over my face. "Mom, we should leave," she said. "Stay somewhere else for a while, a hotel maybe." "No," I said firmly. "I won't let him chase us out of our own lives." We handed the letter to the police the next morning, and they promised to increase patrols around my neighborhood. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Over the next few days, the tension grew unbearable. Strange cars slowed as they passed my house. Once, I came home from the shop to find the back gate open, though I was sure I'd closed it that morning. Another night. The motion light flicked on for no reason, and I stood frozen in the dark hallway, gripping a fireplace poker like a weapon. Then came the vandalism. I woke up one morning to find my car defaced, its windshield cracked, the paint scratched deeply across the hood. 3 words sprayed in bright red paint screamed back at me, "Pay what you owe." Clara gasped when she saw it. I just stood there, cold and still. I'd reached a point beyond fear. Something inside me hardened. I called the police again. Detective Lawson arrived, took photos, and promised they'd step up their surveillance. But I could tell from the look in his eyes he didn't have enough to arrest Joel yet. All we could do was wait. That evening, Clara and I sat together on the couch, the glow from the fireplace flickering against the walls. "He's not going to stop," she said softly. "He's obsessed. He wants control again." "I know," I said. "But control is exactly what he's losing, and that's what terrifies him." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, I felt her trust me again. That meant everything. But I also knew I couldn't rely on the law alone. Men like Joel always found loopholes, always wiggled through cracks. I had to make my own plan. That night, after Clara went to bed, I pulled out my binder labeled The Truth. I opened it on the table, flipping through all the notes, documents, and recordings I'd gathered. Somewhere in these pages lay the key to taking him down for good. I decided to take a risk. The next morning, I called one of Joel's former business partners, a man named Felix Ward. I'd found his name buried in one of the loan documents months ago, listed as a co-signer on one of Joel's failed ventures. When he answered, his tone was cautious. "I don't know who you are," he said. "But if this is about Joel, I'm done talking about him." "I'm not here to accuse you," I said. "I'm here to finish what he started and end him legally." There was silence. Then Felix sighed. "He burned me too. Promised me a cut of a real estate deal that never existed. Took 50 grand and vanished. You're telling me he's still out there pulling the same tricks?" "Oh, he's out there," I said darkly. "And I intend to make sure he never gets the chance to do it again." Felix hesitated, then said, "If you're serious, I might have something you'll want to see." That call changed everything. Felix sent me copies of contracts, emails, even photos linking Joel to fraudulent investment events across the state. He'd been running scams under aliases for years. The pieces were finally falling into place. When I showed the evidence to Denise, she smiled for the first time in weeks. "This is gold, Evelyn. If we can corroborate this with what the police have, he's finished." It felt like a turning point, a sliver of light cutting through the months of fear. Clara seemed lighter too, laughing again, even humming as she helped around the shop. But I knew we weren't safe yet. Because cornered animals don't surrender, they lash out. And Joel was as cornered as he'd ever been. I could feel it in my bones. He'd make one last, desperate move. He'd come after me directly. That was fine. I was ready for him this time. But the real revenge I had planned was still quietly in motion. I decided it was time for Joel to face justice and humiliation. For weeks, I had been gathering evidence, organizing every shred of proof against Joel, but the law moved at a snail's pace. I couldn't just sit around waiting for him to hurt someone else. It was time to force his hand to make him reveal the monster behind his polished smile. The key came from Felix Ward, the man Joel had scammed out of $50,000. Felix was smart, bitter, and just angry enough to help me. He'd kept records, 2 emails, voicemails, and photos from their so-called investment events, where Joel promised huge returns to unsuspecting victims. Felix had tried to get law enforcement involved years ago, but Joel's trail was always too clean. Until now. We spent hours on the phone, comparing notes and planning what we called the final show. The goal was simple: make Joel incriminate himself. Felix suggested we lure him into a fake business meeting, something tempting enough to bring him out of hiding. We'd act as if Felix had found a new investor willing to back Joel's next big project. Knowing Joel, the promise of easy money and validation would be irresistible. I contacted Detective Lawson and told him our plan. At first, he was hesitant. "You understand we can't authorize civilians to bait a suspect," he said. "I'm not asking for authorization," I replied. "I'm asking for backup." After a long silence, he finally agreed. 2 plainclothes officers would attend the meeting, posing as potential investors. Their job was to record everything and arrest him the moment he confessed or made a move that could be tied to fraud or intimidation. The meeting was set for the following Friday afternoon at a cafe halfway between my town and the city. Felix handled the invitation. He emailed Joel with a simple, enticing line. "Felix, I've got a new investor interested in a quick-turn real estate venture. Low risk, high reward. Want in?" Joel responded within 20 minutes. "Joel, always. Tell me where and when." When I read his reply, I felt something sharp twist in my chest. He was walking straight into it, completely unaware. The morning of the meeting, I could barely eat. Clara tried to stay calm, but I could see the anxiety in her eyes. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" she asked. "What if he figures it out?" "He won't," I said, steady but cold. "Joel's biggest weakness is that he thinks everyone else is dumber than him." We met Felix at the cafe an hour before Joel's arrival. The 2 detectives were already there, pretending to read newspapers while sipping coffee. Felix looked nervous, tugging at his collar. "He's not going to like seeing you here," he warned. "That's the point," I said, opening my binder and placing it on the table beside my coffee cup. Inside were copies of every document, his fake companies, the forged debt transfer, the harassment letters, and the statements from Clara and Felix. It was the whole story, bound in black and white. At 2 p.m., sharp, Joel walked in. Even after everything he'd done, he had that same smug confidence. Designer jacket, expensive watch, like a man with nothing to hide. But when his eyes landed on me, that confidence faltered. "Just for a moment, Evelyn," he said slowly. "What a surprise." I smiled faintly. "Hello, Joel. Care to sit?" He hesitated, glancing at Felix. Then at the two men reading in the corner. "What is this?" Felix leaned back. "A business opportunity. You said you wanted back in, right? We're all here to talk money." Joel relaxed slightly, enough to fake a grin. "Now you're speaking my language." He took a seat across from me, but his eyes never stopped darting. I could see his brain working, calculating exits, scanning for threats. "So," Felix said, playing his part perfectly, "our investor here wants to understand how you run your operations. Maybe explain one of your past deals." Joel smirked, leaning forward. "Past deals? You mean the ones that tanked because people didn't follow instructions? I've built companies, gentlemen. I make money move. That's what I do." He was performing now, boasting for an audience he didn't know was recording every word. "Like the one you ran under Hartwell Investments?" I asked casually, flipping open my binder. His smile froze. "That's ancient history." "Ancient history," I repeated, showing him a document. "You mean the company registered under a fake address? The one tied to stolen investor funds and forged contracts? Or maybe the one you signed under my name?" He went pale. "You need to stop talking, Evelyn." "I didn't. You forged my signature. You threatened me. You sent letters, vandalized my property, and harassed your wife until she finally broke down. And now, you're sitting here, still pretending you're a businessman instead of a con artist." His mask slipped completely. The charm evaporated, replaced by raw fury. "You think you're clever? You think you can trap me?" "I don't think," I said calmly. "I know." The detective stood up then, badges flashing. One of them placed a hand on Joel's shoulder as the other pulled out a warrant. Joel's face twisted with rage. "This is entrapment," he shouted. "You can't do this." "Oh, we can," one detective said evenly. "And we will." As they cuffed him, he turned to me, eyes burning with hate. "You think you've won, Evelyn? You ruined my life." I met his gaze and said quietly, "No, Joel. You ruined it yourself." I just turned on the lights so everyone could see. They led him out of the cafe, and for the first time in months, I felt my lungs fill with air that didn't taste like fear. Felix sat back, exhaling deeply. "You're one hell of a woman," he said. I managed a tired smile. "No, I'm just a mother who got tired of watching someone destroy her family." As the police car pulled away, I watched Joel's reflection vanish in the side mirror. It felt like watching a ghost dissolve into daylight. As he was led away, he screamed that I'd ruined his life, but I only felt relief. For the first time in months, the house felt quiet and peaceful again. The night after Joel's arrest, I sat by the fire with a cup of tea that finally stayed warm long enough to drink. There were no phone calls, no knocks on the door, no threats. Just the soft hum of the heater and the gentle crackle of flames. I hadn't realized how much fear had lived in my body until it was gone. The silence felt like freedom. Clara slept upstairs. She hadn't been able to stop crying after we got the news. They weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of release, of exhaustion, of finally letting go of the weight she'd been carrying for far too long. For the first time in years, she didn't have to defend him or justify his actions. She was free too. I stayed awake most of that night, staring into the fire and thinking about how close we had come to losing everything. If I hadn't started digging, if Felix hadn't helped, if the police hadn't acted when they did, Joel might still be out there, ruining lives one forged signature at a time. The next morning, the world seemed different. The snow outside sparkled under the winter sun, and for once, I didn't dread the day ahead. Clara came down wearing one of my old sweaters and smiled faintly when she saw me. "Good morning," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. "Good morning, sweetheart." She sat down beside me, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. "They said he's being charged with fraud, forgery, and harassment. Detective Lawson called to update me." I nodded. "He'll be in court soon. You won't have to see him unless you choose to." Her shoulders sagged with relief. "I don't want to see him ever again." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Then you won't. We'll handle everything through the lawyer." Days passed slowly but gently after that. We fell into a new rhythm: morning walks, small chores, and long talks over dinner. Clara started smiling more. She even laughed one afternoon when the cat knocked over a vase, something she would have panicked about before. That laughter felt like a small miracle. A week later, Denise called with good news. "Evelyn, the debt transfer is being nullified. The courts accepted the forgery evidence. You're officially cleared of any financial obligation." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just closed my eyes and let the words sink in. Free. Completely free. "Thank you, Denise," I said finally, my throat tight. "You've saved us." She chuckled softly. "No, Evelyn, you saved yourself. I just handled the paperwork." When I hung up, I sat there and let the relief wash over me. It wasn't just about the money, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my name, my life. That evening, I told Clara the news. She started crying again, but this time, they were happy tears. "Mom, I don't deserve how patient you've been with me," she whispered. "After everything I did, signing those papers, believing his lies, I don't know how you can even look at me." I took her face in my hands and said, "You're my daughter. You were manipulated, not malicious. You trusted the wrong person, but that doesn't make you bad. It makes you human." She nodded, her lip trembling. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you." "You already are," I said, pulling her into a hug. "By being here. By healing." Over the following months, our lives began to rebuild in ways I hadn't expected. My flower shop, which I had neglected during the chaos, started thriving again. Customers came back, bringing stories of how they'd followed what happened in the papers. The local news had picked up the story, "Small-town widow helps expose con artist husband," and for once, my name was being spoken with admiration instead of pity. At first, I hated the attention, but then I realized something important. Every time someone thanked me, they weren't just thanking me for taking Joel down. They were thanking me for standing up, for showing that women like us, often dismissed as fragile or foolish, could be stronger than the men who tried to exploit us. Clara also began to change. She started therapy with a counselor who specialized in emotional abuse and financial manipulation. It wasn't easy, she came home drained after every session, but I could see her rebuilding herself piece by piece. She began volunteering at the local women's support center, helping others who had fallen into toxic relationships. One evening, as we were closing up the shop together, she looked at me and said, "You know, I used to think love meant staying no matter how bad it got. But now I understand that real love, your kind of love, means protecting yourself too." I smiled. That's the kind of lesson that sticks. We were finally learning to live again, to breathe without fear, to laugh without guilt. For the first time in a long time, I could imagine a future not defined by survival, but by peace. Then, one afternoon, while sorting mail at the counter, I saw an envelope that froze me where I stood. It was thin, white, and stamped with the insignia of the Oregon State Correctional Facility. I didn't have to open it to know who it was from. Clara walked in a moment later, noticing my face. "Mom, what's wrong?" I handed her the envelope. "It's from him." She stared at it, her fingers trembling slightly. "Do you want to open it?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to burn it without reading a word. But another part, the part that needed closure, knew I had to see what he had to say. I tore it open carefully. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, written in Joel's familiar, confident handwriting. As I read the first line, A chill crept down my spine. It was from Joel, written from prison, and it changed everything. Joel's letter was dripping with bitterness and venom. The handwriting was the same arrogant scrawl I'd seen on every forged document, every fake signature. Even behind bars, he couldn't resist trying to control the narrative. The first words made my stomach twist. "Dear Evelyn, congratulations, you finally got what you wanted." I kept reading, each line more poisonous than the last. "You think you've won, but all you did was prove how pathetic you are. You couldn't stand seeing your daughter love someone more than you. You ruined her marriage, destroyed my business, and turned everyone against me. But don't think for a second this is over. I may be behind bars, but I have friends. You'll regret crossing me." I folded the paper halfway through but couldn't stop myself. I had to finish. "You and your spoiled daughter deserve each other, two women who feed off sympathy. When I'm out, I'll come collect what's mine. Consider this your warning." No signature, just a single line at the bottom. "Merry Christmas." My hands shook, but my face stayed still. The fire beside me hissed softly, casting shadows across the room. Clara stood nearby, frozen. "He's still trying to scare us," she whispered. "He can't hurt us anymore, right?" "No," I said firmly. Though part of me wasn't entirely sure. He's desperate. That's all this is. I took the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and set it on the table. For a moment, we just stared at it. The silence heavy between us. Clara's breathing quickened. "Mom, I can't go through this again," she said. "I finally feel okay. And now he's back in our heads." I reached for her hand. "Then we won't let him in," I said. "Not this time." That night, I sat alone by the fire with the letter in front of me. I read it again, not out of fear, but out of clarity. Joel was no longer a man with power. He was a caged animal lashing out. His words weren't threats, they were proof of his downfall. Every sentence reeked of impotence, of a man who couldn't accept defeat. In the morning, I took the letter straight to the police. Detective Lawson read it, nodded, and said, "We'll file it as harassment. Prison correspondence like this violates the terms of his remand. He won't get away with it." "Can he still contact us again?" I asked. "Not after this," he said. "We'll make sure of it." Hearing that gave me a strange peace. Joel's voice had haunted our lives for so long that even seeing his handwriting was enough to trigger the old anxiety. But this time, instead of letting it consume me, I decided to take back control in the most symbolic way I could. That evening, after dinner, I called Clara into the living room. The letter sat on the mantel beside a small box of matches. She frowned when she saw it. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer right away. I picked up the letter, held it for a moment, and then struck a match. The flame caught the edge of the paper instantly, curling it into black ash. We both watched as Joel's words, his threats, his arrogance, his poison turned to dust in seconds. When the last ember faded, I said quietly, "That's the last time his words have power in this house." Clara nodded, eyes glistening. "It feels final." "It is," I said. After that night, we rarely spoke his name again. Life began to settle into something almost normal. The court proceedings moved forward, and soon, Joel's charges expanded. New victims came forward, including Felix and others he had swindled years earlier. By the time his sentencing arrived, he was facing more than a decade behind bars. When the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, Clara and I sat in the back of the courtroom, hands clasped tightly. Joel barely looked at us. When the judge read the sentence, I saw the briefest flash of disbelief cross his face before it hardened into rage. He was led away without another word. Outside the courthouse, Clara broke down in tears, laughing and sobbing at the same time. "It's over," she said again and again, as if repeating it would make it real. I hugged her tightly. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over." But that night, as I sat on the porch under a sky dusted with stars, I thought about what over really meant. Did it mean peace? Closure? Or simply the end of one kind of suffering and the beginning of another, the slow, quiet work of rebuilding? I realized then that revenge wasn't always about destruction. Sometimes, it was about survival, about choosing to live better, freer, stronger than the person who tried to break you. In destroying his empire, I hadn't just avenged myself, I had liberated my daughter from a lifetime of manipulation. And that, to me, was the purest form of victory. Clara came outside a little later, a blanket around her shoulders. "You okay?" she asked softly. "I'm better than okay," I said, smiling faintly. For the first time in a long time, I can breathe. She sat beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. "Do you think he'll ever change?" I looked out, at the night sky, the stars glimmering faintly above the pines. "People like Joel don't change," I said. "But that's his curse, not ours." We sat there in silence for a while, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that only comes after chaos. The kind that's earned, not given. When we finally went inside, I glanced once more at the fireplace. The ashes from his letter still sat there, gray and fine, like the remains of a bad dream. I smiled to myself, picked up the poker, and stirred them into the flames until they disappeared completely. But revenge, I realized, had already been served in the most poetic way. When word spread around town about Joel's arrest, reactions were mixed but mostly satisfying. In a small town like ours, news travels faster than wind through pine trees. By the time the story hit the local paper, everyone already seemed to know the broad strokes. A man accused of fraud, exposed by his mother-in-law, sentenced after a string of financial crimes. They didn't need to print names for people to connect the dots. At first, I dreaded the attention. My flower shop had always been a quiet refuge, a place where gossip wilted faster than the blooms. But now, people came not just for bouquets, they came for the story. Some were curious, others sympathetic. A few just wanted to see the woman who had stood up to a con man and won. "Evelyn, you're an inspiration," Mrs. Porter said one morning, clutching a vase of daisies to her chest. "We all knew there was something off about that man. You did what needed to be done." I smiled politely, though inside I was exhausted. The truth was, I hadn't done it to be brave. I'd done it because I'd had no choice. Courage, I was learning, wasn't something you planned, it was something you stumbled into when life gave you no other option. Still, it was strange being seen as a hero. I'd spent months feeling powerless, and now people spoke to me like I'd slain a dragon. I wasn't sure how to carry that. Clara struggled with it too. Whenever we went out together, people offered kind words, but their eyes lingered longer than before. Some whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. Others offered pity disguised as encouragement. "Poor thing," I overheard one woman murmur at the grocery store. "Married to that man. I don't know how she'll ever live it down." Clara heard it too. She turned her cart around and walked out without saying a word. When we got home, she sat at the kitchen table, eyes shining with unshed tears. "They'll never let me forget, will they?" I sat across from her. "People have short memories. One day, someone else's scandal will take the spotlight. What matters is how you move forward." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "Then that's what I'll do, move forward." And she did. She threw herself into her volunteer work at the Women's Support Center. What began as a small way to stay busy became her calling. She started helping women who had been manipulated, lied to, or trapped in relationships that looked perfect from the outside but were rotten within. Each story she heard chipped away at her guilt, reminding her she wasn't alone. "She's incredible," one of the coordinators told me one afternoon when I came to pick her up. "So empathetic, so strong. You can tell she's been through something, but she uses that pain to help others." Hearing that filled me with pride and sorrow in equal measure. I'd wanted so badly to protect her from pain, yet it was that pain that shaped her into the woman she was becoming. Meanwhile, life at the shop returned to something resembling normal. Valentine's Day orders piled up, and the rhythm of arranging flowers became my therapy. There was something symbolic about it, taking stems cut from their roots and giving them new beauty, new life. It was a reminder that even after being torn down, something good could bloom again. One morning, a reporter came by asking for an interview for a regional feature about women who fought back. I declined. I didn't want fame. I didn't need recognition. My revenge wasn't meant for the world to applaud, it was meant for my own peace of mind. Still, I couldn't deny the ripple effect. People started reaching out quietly, women who'd been financially exploited by partners, parents whose children had been manipulated into debt, even an elderly man whose niece had forged his checks. They came seeking advice, not flowers. I realized then that my story wasn't unique, it was just louder. And if sharing it helped even one person recognize a predator before it was too late, maybe it was worth being remembered for something other than tragedy. One evening, Clara came into the shop as I was closing up. The last rays of sunset spilled through the windows, painting everything in gold. She leaned against the counter, a soft smile on her face. "I started a group," she said. "At the center. It's called Reclaiming Ourselves. It's for people who lost more than money, they lost confidence, trust, identity. I told them about us, about how we rebuilt." I felt tears sting my eyes. "You told them everything?" "Not everything," she said with a small laugh. "Just the important parts, the ones that end in hope." I walked over and hugged her, holding on longer than I probably needed to. In her arms, I could feel the heartbeat of someone who had survived the worst and come out stronger. We were healing not perfectly, not quickly, but honestly. Christmas came around again sooner than I expected. The first snow fell early that year, soft and powdery, blanketing the town in white. The lights went up around Main Street, and the world seemed to shimmer with cautious optimism. I closed the shop early on Christmas Eve and went home to the smell of cinnamon and pine. Clara was already there, humming carols as she decorated the tree. For the first time since everything began, we were celebrating without the shadow of fear hanging over us. As we sat down for dinner, I realized something had shifted. The ache that had lived in my chest since that terrible Christmas when she handed me the red envelope, it was gone. But as I looked at her across the table, I saw something flicker in her eyes, hesitation. Like she had something to say but wasn't sure how. "What is it?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Nothing bad, just, you'll see tomorrow." I laughed softly. "You and your surprises." She grinned, a little mischievous, and I felt warmth spread through me. Whatever it was, I knew this time it wouldn't come wrapped in betrayal. But fate had one last surprise for us that holiday season. A year after it all began, Clara showed up at my door holding a single gift box. It was Christmas morning, and the air outside was crisp. The kind of cold that painted frost on the windows and made every breath visible. I had just finished brewing coffee when I heard a knock at the door. Clara stood there, bundled in her coat and scarf, a snowflake or two tangled in her hair. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, but her eyes were warm, clear, and most importantly, free. "Merry Christmas, Mom," she said softly, holding out a small box wrapped in silver paper with a white ribbon. I smiled and stepped aside. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Come in before you freeze." She laughed and brushed snow off her shoulders as she entered, the scent of pine and cinnamon filling the air. The fire was already crackling, and soft music played from the radio. For the first time in years, Christmas morning didn't feel haunted. It felt peaceful. I handed her a mug of coffee and nodded toward the gift. "What's this?" Her smile was shy but genuine. "Open it. I promise it's not a debt this time." We both laughed, though there was an unspoken tenderness beneath it. I sat on the couch, untying the ribbon carefully. Inside the box was a delicate gold necklace with two small intertwined hearts. Simple, elegant, and beautiful. I looked up at her. "Clara, it's lovely." She sat beside me, her voice soft but steady. "It's us," she said. "The hearts. I had it made at a small shop in town. They told me it represents connection, how even if something bends or breaks, it can still be mended stronger than before." The words hit me deeper than I expected. I blinked back tears and clasped the necklace around my neck. "It's perfect," she smiled, her eyes shimmering. "I wanted this Christmas to feel different. Last year I brought pain into this house. This year, I wanted to bring love back. We sat together for a long moment, both of us quiet, both remembering everything we'd been through, the lies, the fear, the betrayal, the survival. The weight of the past year pressed gently on us, but for once, it didn't crush us. It reminded us how far we'd come. Later that morning, we exchanged smaller gifts, little things, thoughtful things. I gave her a soft journal and a pen with her initials engraved. "You always have a way with words," I told her. "You should write your story someday." She traced her fingers over the cover and smiled faintly. "Maybe I will, but it'll have a happy ending this time." We spent the afternoon cooking together, laughing at our own clumsy attempts at baking cookies that came out slightly misshapen but delicious anyway. It was the kind of day I had prayed for, simple, peaceful, filled with quiet joy. After lunch, we sat by the fire again, wrapped in blankets. Snowflakes drifted lazily outside the window. Clara sighed softly. "You know what I realized, Mom? I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting what happened, pretending it didn't hurt. But I get it now. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the pain, it's about not letting it own you." I looked at her, pride swelling in my chest. "That's a hard lesson to learn." She nodded. "Yeah, but I had a good teacher. That made me laugh." "If you mean me, I don't remember signing up to teach forgiveness." "No," she said with a small grin. "But you taught it anyway. When you chose to help me, instead of hating me." I reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "That's what mothers do. We hold on, even when it hurts." The rest of the day drifted by in warmth and laughter. We played old Christmas songs, shared memories of her father, and even watched one of those cheesy holiday movies we used to make fun of. It wasn't the most extravagant Christmas we'd ever had, but it was the most meaningful. When evening came, I walked her to the door. The snow had thickened, falling in soft flakes that glowed under the porch light. She turned to me and smiled, her expression gentle but full of emotion. "Thank you, Mom," she said. "For everything. For believing in me when I didn't deserve it." "You always deserved it," I said. "You just needed to remember who you were." She hugged me tightly, and I felt her heartbeat against mine, steady, alive, strong. It reminded me of all the nights I'd feared I'd lose her, all the prayers I'd whispered into the dark, and now here she was whole, healing, home. When she pulled away, she wiped a tear from her cheek and said, "I'll come by tomorrow to help clean up. Don't stay up too late." I smiled. "You know me. I'll be up reading or rearranging the ornaments again." She laughed and waved before disappearing into the snow. I stood there watching her go until the night swallowed her car's taillights. Back inside, I sank into my favorite chair and touched the necklace around my neck. The hearts felt warm against my skin. A gentle reminder of everything we had survived. I thought about the year before the chaos, the betrayal, the fear, and how it had somehow led to this moment of calm. Life had a strange way of breaking you just enough to show you what truly mattered. The fire crackled softly, and I whispered to myself, "We made it." That Christmas, I realized some gifts come wrapped in regret but open to redemption. Looking back, I realized the true cost of betrayal isn't money, it's trust. In the months after that second Christmas, life finally began to feel ordinary again. Not perfect, nothing ever would be, but beautifully, gently ordinary. I went back to running my flower shop full-time, tending to lilies and tulips instead of legal documents. The smell of fresh blooms replaced the metallic tang of fear that had lingered in my home for too long. Every morning, I'd unlock the front door to the shop, flip the open sign, and feel something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. People would stop in for bouquets, for conversation, for comfort. Flowers, I realized, were a quiet kind of therapy. They reminded me that beauty could still grow after things had been cut down. Clara visited almost every day after her volunteer work at the Women's Support Center. She'd bring coffee and pastries, sit on the counter, and tell me stories about the people she was helping, women rebuilding their lives after years of manipulation, financial abuse, and deceit. Some of their stories mirrored her own so closely it made my heart ache, but Clara never told them out of pity. She spoke from understanding. She was changing, blossoming in her own right, stronger, wiser, kinder. She was learning to love herself again, and in doing so, she was teaching others to do the same. One evening, as we closed up shop, she said something that stayed with me. "You know, Mom," she began, looking out the window at the streetlights glowing through the falling snow. "If none of this had happened, Joel, the debt, or everything, I don't think I'd ever have found this version of myself. The one who doesn't need someone else to tell her she's enough." I smiled faintly. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to see what you really had." She nodded slowly, her eyes soft. "You always said forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you. I used to think that was just something people said to sound wise. But now I get it. I forgave him not because he deserved it, but because I didn't want to carry him anymore." Her words struck me deeply. It was exactly what I had learned too, though it had taken me longer to admit it. For months, I had thought revenge meant destruction, seeing Joel suffer, watching his empire crumble. But in the end, my real revenge was survival. Living well, living free, refusing to let him define me. After Joel's sentencing, there were moments when I wondered if he ever thought about us, if he regretted what he'd done, or if he was still blaming us for his downfall. I realized it didn't matter. His opinion had no weight in our lives anymore. We were free of his shadow. Still, the lessons lingered. I learned that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, but never exactly as before. It becomes something different, something wiser. Clara and I had to work at it, every single day. There were still moments when the old pain resurfaced, a certain tone in her voice, a glance that reminded me of how she once defended him, but those moments passed. We no longer lived in them. We found rituals of healing, Sunday dinners filled with laughter, walks by the river where we used to go when she was a child. We even took a trip to the coast that summer, something we hadn't done in years. Standing by the ocean, watching the waves crash against the rocks, Clara turned to me and said, "It feels like the water's washing everything clean." I smiled. Maybe it is. Back home, I framed a photo from that trip, the two of us standing together, hair whipping in the wind, both smiling. I hung it above the fireplace, right where the red envelope had once sat a year before. It felt poetic, the way pain and healing could occupy the same space, yet hold completely different energy. Sometimes, customers would still mention Joel's story, or how brave I was to take him down. I never corrected them, but I never felt like a hero. I was just a mother doing what mothers do, fighting for her child, for the truth, for peace. One quiet evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and thought about everything I'd lost and gained. Michael, my late husband, would have been proud. I knew that. He always believed in justice, in doing the right thing even when it hurt. I whispered to the night, "We made it, Michael. She's okay. We're okay." The wind rustled through the trees, soft and affirming, like a reply. In the distance, church bells began to chime, echoing across the valley. I closed my eyes and smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by what had happened. I was grateful for what it had taught me. Love and betrayal, it turns out, are two sides of the same coin. One teaches you how deeply you can trust. The other teaches you how strong you are when that trust is shattered. I'd lived both. And somehow, I'd come out the other side intact. When Clara stopped by later that night, she found me still sitting outside, lost in thought. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how strange life is," I said. "How the worst thing that ever happened to us turned out to be the beginning of something better." She smiled softly. "Maybe that's what healing looks like." I reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. "Maybe it is." We sat there quietly, mother and daughter, two hearts that had been broken and mended. The moonlight fell over us like a blessing. I could almost hear Michael's voice in the back of my mind saying, "Keep going, Evelyn. You did it." And survival, I've learned, is the sweetest revenge of all. Today, I wake up each morning grateful not for what I lost, but for what I reclaimed. It's strange how life settles after a storm. There's a stillness that feels foreign at first, like your body doesn't quite believe it's allowed to rest. For so long, my life had been measured in fear, waiting for the next threat, the next phone call, the next betrayal. But now, The only things I wait for are the sunrise through my kitchen window and the sound of birds outside the shop before customers arrive. The flower shop has become more than a business, it's become a sanctuary. People walk in with heavy hearts and leave a little lighter. I recognize that look. I used to wear it. Sometimes they ask for advice instead of flowers, and I listen. Because that's what healed me, being heard. I started a small program at the shop called Bloom Again. Every month I donate arrangements to the local women's shelter, each one with a handwritten note that reads, "You are stronger than the storm." It's a small thing, but it feels right. It feels like giving back some of the strength others once gave me. Clara is thriving too. She's no longer the fragile young woman who came home with fear in her eyes. She's a counselor now, working full-time at the Women's Support Center where she once volunteered. Sometimes, she shares parts of our story during group sessions, and every time she does, she tells me someone comes up afterward to say, "That's my story too." One afternoon, she visited the shop after work, her hair pulled into a messy bun, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She leaned on the counter and said, "Mom, I've been thinking. I want to start a foundation for people recovering from financial abuse and manipulation, so they don't have to go through what we did." My heart swelled. "That's a beautiful idea." She smiled, that same warm smile that used to light up our kitchen when she was a child. "I want to call it the Heart Foundation, after us, after everything we've survived." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Your father would have been so proud of you." She reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. "You're the reason I survived, Mom. You're the reason I kept fighting." Her words stayed with me long after she left. There had been a time when I thought our bond was beyond repair, that betrayal had built a wall too high to climb. But love has a strange way of finding cracks in even the tallest walls. It seeps through, soft but relentless, until light filters back in. Months passed, and the seasons changed. Spring brought new blooms. Summer brought warmth and laughter, and autumn came with quiet reflection. By the time winter returned, I didn't fear Christmas anymore. I welcomed it. It no longer symbolized loss or deceit, it symbolized rebirth. That Christmas, Clara and I decided to do something different. Instead of exchanging gifts, we volunteered together at the women's shelter. We decorated the hall with wreaths and garlands, served food, and listened to stories from women rebuilding their lives. Some had fled abusive relationships. Others were recovering from partners who drained their savings or forged their names, stories painfully familiar. At one point, a woman about my age took my hand and said, "You're Evelyn Hart, right? I read about what you did. You gave me the courage to leave." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. Finally, I managed to whisper, "Then it was all worth it." That night, as we drove home, snow fell gently across the windshield. Clara turned to me and said, "You know, I used to hate Christmas. It reminded me of everything I'd lost. But now, I think it reminds me of everything we found again." I smiled, tears blurring the twinkling lights along Main Street. That's what healing looks like. It doesn't erase the past, it just gives it meaning. When we got home, we didn't rush to open gifts or watch movies. We just sat together by the fire, a cup of cocoa in each hand, and let the warmth of the flames fill the spaces that fear once occupied. Later that night, as Clara prepared to leave, she hugged me one last time. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said. "I'm bringing over the paperwork for the foundation. I want you to sign it with me." I laughed softly. "As long as it's not in a red envelope." She grinned, rolling her eyes. Never again. After she left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the snow blanket the quiet street. The world looked peaceful, soft, new, forgiving. I thought about how far we'd come, about the years we'd lost to fear, and how we'd reclaimed them one day at a time. I wasn't the same woman I'd been 2 years ago. That Evelyn had been trusting, maybe even naive. The one standing here now was different, stronger, wiser, unshakable. I understood something then. Revenge had been the spark that got me through the darkest days, but forgiveness was the flame that kept me warm afterward. Justice was important, but peace was priceless. I walked to the fireplace and adjusted the photo of Clara and me at the coast. Her laughter in that picture still lit up the room. I touched the frame gently and whispered, "We did it, baby. We really did." Then I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the Christmas tree to fill the room. The ornaments glittered softly, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely safe. Because sometimes, the greatest gift you can receive is the strength to never be fooled again.